Hello, family. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The golden rays of the Lagos sunset spilled through the large windows of the Okiri residence, catching the glimmer on Charity Nwokocha's latest sketch. "This is it, Tanya," she said with excitement, holding up the intricate fabric design. "This will change everything for us." Tanya smiled, nodding approvingly as she leaned over Charity's shoulder. "You're brilliant, Char, honestly." But deep within her smile simmered a quiet ache. Tanya Okiri had always stood in the light of Charity's glow, best friends since childhood, raised like sisters, yet one always ahead of the other. Charity's grace, her effortless talent, and now the growing buzz around her name in Lagos's fashion circle left Tanya feeling invisible. As the two laughed over their upcoming fashion competition and shared their dreams of taking over the industry together, Tanya's eyes lingered on a framed photo of Oliver Duru on the wall. Her heart tightened. He was Charity's boyfriend, but he used to be her silent dream. Later that night, alone in her room, Tanya stared at her own design sketchpad, her fingers shaking. She had talent, but not like Charity. Not that effortless kind that made people stop in their tracks. And not only had Charity unknowingly stolen the spotlight, but also Oliver, the man Tanya had quietly loved for years. Her younger sister Elizabeth had once teased, "You'll never tell him, will you? You'll just keep pretending." Tanya had laughed it off. But now that pretense had become a deep, aching wound. That evening, as Charity prepared for bed and sent a voice note about how excited she was for the competition, Tanya opened her own tablet to search the latest fashion trends, only to find a blog naming Charity the next big face in Nigerian design. Her vision blurred. She dropped her phone. The growing storm of envy brewed within her, but she said nothing. Instead, she returned to Charity's side the next morning with her usual warm smile and a cup of tea. "To our future," she said, clinking cups. Charity laughed. But somewhere, beneath the surface of sisterhood, something toxic had already begun to bloom. The air at the gallery opening buzzed with laughter, soft jazz, and the scent of spiced canapes, but Tanya stood stiffly beside a sculpture of woven fabric, her smile rigid as she watched Charity and Oliver glide through the crowd. Charity had been invited to showcase a preview of her collection, and Oliver had come to support her, arm around her waist, whispering into her ear, the way Tanya once dreamed he would with her. She forced herself to clap when Charity was called on stage to speak, but her hands trembled with a subtle ache. "He looks at her like she's made of sunlight," Elizabeth murmured beside her, sipping juice. "You all right, Tanya?" Tanya nodded quickly, brushing a curl behind her ear. "Of course, I'm proud of her." But pride had long since given way to bitterness, especially since Oliver had once been her closest friend too, until Charity came between them. Back at home, the silence between Tanya and Elizabeth was filled with the ticking of the hallway clock. "Why don't you ever say anything?" Elizabeth asked softly, watching her sister fold and refold her scarf. "You loved him first. Everyone knew it. Even I knew it." Tanya looked up, her eyes cold. "But she didn't," she whispered. She walked into the room, and everything changed. Just like that. Her voice cracked. Elizabeth looked away, unsure how to console a pain that had festered so long it had changed shape. Tanya opened her laptop and stared at the social media posts from the event. Oliver's hand on Charity's back, their fingers intertwined, the matching outfits. Her thumb hovered over a photo, eyes burning. "He should have been mine," she said, more to herself than to her sister. But she pushed the pain down, swallowing it with a long breath. "She doesn't even know what she took from me," she added quietly, shutting the laptop. "But she will." Weeks later, the fashion competition was all the buzz. The Fashion Forward Nigeria Expo, where over 200 young designers would present original pieces in a high-stakes contest. Charity and Tanya had both entered, and their names had already begun to swirl among the top contenders. In Charity's room, threads and patterns littered the floor, her sewing machine humming late into the night. "This piece is going to be my signature," she beamed, showing Tanya a crimson dress with layered silk folds. Tanya smiled faintly, but her jaw clenched as she noted the flawless tailoring. "It's impressive," she muttered, turning her gaze to her own sketchpad. But deep down, she knew hers lacked the spark Charity's designs carried so effortlessly. That evening, when Charity stepped out for a quick errand, Tanya lingered in her room, eyes scanning the pinned sketches, the carefully labeled swatches. Her gaze fell on a notebook with recent illustrations, so detailed, so brilliant. And in that moment, a cruel thought was born. Tanya copied 2 of the designs into her own sketchpad, adding slight modifications. Her hands were steady, her conscience blurred. "It's just inspiration," she told herself. But it wasn't. She knew it wasn't. The next day at registration, the judges gave her a warm welcome. Her preliminary designs had created a stir online. One of them even said, "Your work carries such new energy." Tanya smiled tightly. Charity, unaware, embraced her and whispered, "This is it, Tan. Let's both shine." That night, Elizabeth found her sister sitting silently on the balcony. "You okay?" she asked. Tanya nodded. "I will be," she replied, watching the stars. But her mind was elsewhere, on what she'd taken, and on what it might cost if Charity ever found out. The morning sun rose with a deceptive calm, casting golden light across the breakfast table where Charity sat humming as she peeled fruit. Tanya entered slowly, holding her phone. "Guess what?" she said with a feigned smile. "Oliver wants to take you out for a surprise dinner tonight. He asked me to keep you busy till evening." Charity laughed, touched by the gesture. "I'll pretend not to know then," she teased. "I've never seen him so nervous around me." The conversation flowed as usual, but something cold settled in Tanya's stomach. Her plan had been forming for days, ever since she'd learned she was pregnant, with a man who wasn't ready, and who no longer saw her. She couldn't face the shame. She couldn't let Charity continue winning. So, with shaking hands, she slipped a single crushed pill into Charity's orange juice, the same glass she'd placed carefully at her friend's right hand. Charity drank the juice without a second thought, still talking about her new designs and the color palette for her final piece. But 10 minutes later, her smile faded. "I feel dizzy," she murmured, pressing a hand to her temple. Tanya stood still, lips parted. "Maybe you're just tired," she offered too quickly. Charity's hands began to tremble. I don't know. My chest, Tanya. Something's wrong." Tanya grabbed her arm, guiding her to sit. "You probably just need to lie down." Her voice trembled, but her face remained neutral. She watched Charity slowly slump on the couch, sweat beading at her brow. The guilt came in waves, unwelcome, intrusive. But then Charity sat up abruptly and stumbled to the sink, vomiting. The pill hadn't worked fully. Tanya panicked internally, but kept her composure. "Let's get you to bed," she said gently, stroking her hair. And Charity, weak and trusting, nodded. As she fell asleep moments later, unaware, Tanya whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far." But the seed had been sown. The betrayal was real and irreversible. The evening sky was streaked with lavender and orange as Oliver led Charity to a quiet rooftop restaurant he had reserved for them. She looked radiant, though paler than usual, her steps slower. "I almost didn't make it today," she admitted with a soft laugh as she gripped his arm. "I felt a bit off this morning, maybe stress." Oliver kissed her temple and guided her to a candle-lit table. "You've been overworking," he said, pulling out her seat. "After this competition, I want you to rest. Maybe we both should." She smiled, sipping water instead of wine, her stomach still queasy. The waiters brought out a small cake, and then Oliver stood, heart racing. "Charity Nwokocha," he began, reaching into his coat pocket. "You've changed my life. You're my calm in chaos. Will you marry me?" Her hands flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "Oliver," she breathed, then nodded. "Yes, yes." Applause erupted from nearby tables as he slid the ring on her finger and pulled her into an embrace. Across the city, Tanya stared at her phone, having ignored Oliver's calls all day. When she finally opened her messages, the first thing she saw was a picture. Oliver kneeling before Charity, her hand extended, ring glinting in the dim light. Tanya's world tilted. Her fingers trembled, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. "She said yes," she whispered bitterly. The pregnancy test on her nightstand suddenly felt like a curse. "I should have told him first," she muttered, pacing the room. "He would have chosen me if he knew. He would have." But even as she tried to believe it, her reflection in the mirror showed a different truth. Not guilt, not regret, but fury. A new plan began to take root, one that would end what Charity had started. Charity sat in the common room, going through final preparations for her showcase when Tanya walked in, her expression unreadable. "I need to talk to you," she said curtly. Charity looked up with concern. "You okay?" Tanya dropped a folder on the table. Inside were side-by-side comparisons of their designs. "You copied me," she said bluntly. "These patterns, I sketched them first." Charity blinked in disbelief, then opened the folder. "Wait, what? No, Tanya, I didn't. These are mine. I worked on them for weeks." Tanya's face hardened. "You had access to my drafts? Don't lie to me." The accusation cut deeper than any blade. Charity stood, shaking her head. "We've shared everything since we were kids. Why would I steal from you?" Tanya folded her arms. "Because you always take what you want. Even Oliver." That name, said with venom, made the air between them crackle. The judges walked in minutes later, calling both of them for a pre-show interview. Tanya gave a strained smile and stepped out. Charity followed slowly, mind spinning. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stayed up flipping through her design journal, trying to understand how things had turned so cruel. The next morning, she approached the competition committee and withdrew her participation without a word to Tanya. When asked why, she simply replied, "Some things matter more than awards." Later that afternoon, she waited at their favorite cafe, hoping Tanya would show up. When she finally did, Charity looked at her with tear-filled eyes. "I stepped back for you," she whispered. "Not because I was wrong, but because I loved you." Tanya didn't answer. She only stirred her tea in silence. Inside her chest, guilt wrestled with a darker satisfaction. Charity had bowed out, and Tanya wasn't done yet. Weeks passed without warmth. Tension lingered like smoke between the two women. Then one morning, Tanya appeared at Charity's door with forced cheerfulness. "Let's take a break, just us," she offered. "I found this gorgeous cliffside resort. Quiet, peaceful, like old times." Charity hesitated. "You sure?" "After everything?" Tanya waved it off. "Too much drama lately. Let's breathe. Please." Charity, craving closure, agreed. They packed bags and left the next day. The journey to the resort was filled with nervous silence, broken occasionally by hollow laughter. But that night, as the ocean roared beneath the cliffs, the unease in Charity's heart deepened. Tanya suggested a midnight stroll. "The moonlight's gorgeous. Let's take pictures." As they walked toward the edge, Charity paused. "I've missed this. Us," she said, turning to her friend. Tanya gave a distant smile. "I have too." But her fingers twitched by her side. Unknown to Charity, Elijah Ume, on a brief solo vacation, watched from the balcony of a nearby lodge. He had seen the two women arrive, and something about their body language didn't sit right with him. From his room, he noticed them nearing the cliffside. As Tanya shifted closer, Charity stepped back slightly, peering down at the rocks. "It's higher than I thought," she chuckled nervously. Tanya's voice lowered. "You always rise so high, Charity. Don't you ever wonder what it feels like to fall?" Before Charity could process the words, everything turned into a blur of air, screams, and crashing silence. The scream tore through the cold night air, but it was swallowed quickly by the crash of waves. Charity's body vanished over the edge as Tanya staggered back, trembling. Her hands flew to her face, but no tears came, only shallow, panicked breaths. She slipped, she muttered aloud, convincing herself of a lie she hadn't rehearsed. Her eyes darted around, expecting someone to appear, but no one did. The silence that followed felt unbearable. After minutes that felt like hours, she hurried back to the resort, disheveled and pale. When a receptionist asked if everything was all right, Tanya merely smiled. She left early this morning. Family emergency. The lie rolled off her tongue like silk. And within a day, she was back in the city without Charity and without a trace of guilt on her polished surface. But far below the cliffs, wedged between jagged rocks and wet earth, Charity clung to life. Her body was battered, her leg twisted unnaturally, and blood trickled from a wound at her temple. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Her eyes fluttered open just long enough to see the blurred outline of the sky. Then darkness. Morning came slowly, and with it footsteps. Elijah had ventured out early, unable to shake the unease he'd felt the night before. As he followed the coastal path, something far below caught his eye, a splash of color that didn't belong to nature. Panic surged through him. He scrambled down the terrain with urgency and gasped when he found her, a woman, broken, bruised, barely breathing. "Hey, stay with me," he shouted, checking for a pulse. Her lips moved faintly, but no words came. He wrapped her in his jacket and called for emergency help. In that moment, Elijah didn't know who she was. He only knew someone had left her there to die. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet sorrow. Charity lay unconscious in a dim room, her face wrapped in gauze, a deep wound stitched across her scalp. No ID, no phone, no purse, just a bloodied sketch folded in her coat pocket and a name tag ripped from fabric with the initials CN. Elijah stood by her bed, arms folded. "Who are you?" he murmured. When the nurse asked if he was family, he hesitated. "No, I just found her." But something in him refused to walk away. For days, she drifted in and out of delirium, whispering fragments of words. Design. Tanya. Stolen. Elijah took note of everything, quietly assembling a puzzle he didn't understand yet. The doctors called it retrograde amnesia. Her memories were buried under trauma. Her body might heal, but her mind was lost for now. With no next of kin and no clear identity, Elijah was given permission to temporarily sign as her caretaker. He arranged for her transfer to a modest recovery facility near the coast where privacy was guaranteed. The head nurse, a middle-aged woman named Mama Efioma, took to calling the girl Anna after a nurse from her past. The name stuck. "You're a fighter, Anna," she would whisper during sponge baths and therapy. "Whoever hurt you, they'll face their day." Charity, now Anna, remained silent, her eyes often distant, but every now and then, a flicker of confusion would pass across her features. Meanwhile, Elijah continued his visits, sometimes sitting in the corner reading legal briefs, other times simply talking to her, even when she didn't answer. One day, as he packed his briefcase, she finally looked at him and spoke. "Why am I here?" Her voice was hoarse, raw. Elijah turned slowly. "Because someone tried to erase you," he said. "But you survived." The days bled into weeks, and Anna moved from a hospital bed to a wheelchair and eventually to crutches. Her reflection in the mirror remained unfamiliar, pale scars marked her cheekbone, and her once sleek hair was now a wild tangle. But what disturbed her most wasn't her altered appearance. It was the void. No childhood. No names, no laughter or pain, just a haunting emptiness. "Is it normal to not feel anything?" she asked Mama Ifioma one morning. The older woman gave her a warm smile. "It's your soul protecting you. When it's ready, your memory will return." Anna spent long hours sketching instinctively, shapes and silhouettes that poured out of her fingers like muscle memory. She didn't know what they meant, but drawing made her feel whole. Elijah began bringing her books about design, fabrics, color theory. "Something tells me this is part of you," he said one afternoon, watching her stare at a fashion magazine like it was a sacred relic. "I don't know how I know this," she whispered, flipping through the pages, "but it feels like home." A slow recovery began, physically, mentally, emotionally. Her laugh came easier, her movements stronger, but her trust in people remained fragile. Every time someone mentioned Lagos, she'd flinch. One evening, she sat beside Elijah under the mango tree by the facility's fence. "Do you think someone's looking for me?" she asked. Elijah considered carefully before answering. "If they are, they're not the kind of people you want finding you." She didn't know how true his words were. But in the silence that followed, something within her began to stir, faint but real. A whisper from the past that refused to stay buried. It was an overcast Tuesday when Elijah arrived at the recovery center with a worn-out suitcase. "I found it in a locker at the local police station," he explained as Anna sat in the art room sketching silently. "They didn't know it belonged to you. But something inside told me to ask." He placed it on the table gently, and the locks popped open with a familiar click. Inside were crumpled sketches, a torn calendar with a date circled in red, a worn fabric swatch with the label Nwakocha Originals, and a necklace with an engraved C. Anna froze. Her hand trembled as she touched the jewelry. "This. I know this," she whispered, blinking quickly. Flashes burst through her mind, white lights, laughter, a hand over her mouth, a sharp pain, and then nothing. She dropped the necklace, breathing heavily. Elijah moved beside her and steadied her shoulders. "We don't have to rush. Let it come when it's ready," he said, his voice low and steady. Later that night, Elijah returned to his rented apartment and laid out the contents of the suitcase across his bed. His thoughts swirled with questions. Who had wanted her gone so badly? And why did a part of him feel like this wasn't just another legal puzzle? It felt personal. Back at the facility, Anna stared at the necklace under the dim lamplight. That night she had a vivid dream. She was on a runway, lights flashing, someone shouting her name. "Charity, you're next!" She woke up gasping, soaked in sweat. She sat up and whispered the name into the silence. Charity. Her heart thundered. It didn't feel foreign. It felt like her own. By morning, Anna's hands were covered in charcoal dust as she recreated the face from her dream. A girl with fierce eyes, full lips, and a familiar tilt to her chin. She didn't understand everything, but she knew enough to feel the shift. Something was cracking open inside her. She walked to Elijah during his usual morning visit, holding the drawing out to him. "Does this look like me?" she asked quietly. Elijah studied it, then nodded. "It does. Stronger, maybe. Like someone who survived something brutal." Anna sat across from him. "I think I used to be someone else, and I think I was betrayed." The words shook her. She hadn't meant to say them, but they hung between them like an unwelcome guest. Elijah leaned forward. "When that memory comes fully, I want you to be ready for the pain and for the decision that comes after." That evening, Mama Ifioma wheeled in a tray of dinner and found Anna tearing up old clothes and stitching them into new shapes. "You're back," she said with a knowing smile. "Your hands remember before your heart does." Anna nodded. "I feel angry even when I don't know why." She held up a sleeve she had sewn onto a jacket. "Does that make sense?" The older woman squeezed her shoulder. "It means your soul remembers what your mind has buried." Later, Anna sat on the edge of her bed, the necklace in her palm and the suitcase beside her. One by one, she folded the sketches back in. Each one felt like a page from a book she hadn't finished reading. And then she picked up a mirror for the first time in months, removing the cloth from her face. Her scar had faded, her jaw stronger. She didn't look like the girl who fell. She looked like the woman who would rise. When Elijah returned 3 days later, he found Anna dressed differently, sleek black slacks, a white tailored blouse, and a subtle touch of burgundy lipstick. Her posture was straight, her eyes focused. "I need a new name," she said without greeting. "Something that doesn't belong to who I was, but to who I need to become." Elijah studied her carefully. "What are you thinking?" She didn't hesitate. "Chaza. It means to arise anew in Hebrew. And my last name, Nwud, from my mother's side." Elijah exhaled slowly. "You're sure you're ready for this?" She nodded, clasping her necklace behind her neck. Charity was the girl they tried to erase. Anna was the shadow. Chaza will be the storm. The name change was formalized within a week. Elijah pulled strings quietly through legal networks he trusted. Chaza Nwud was born on paper, and soon after, she began building her second life. She took up work, designing for a local boutique anonymously, her creations quickly becoming the talk of the region. Her hands no longer trembled when she sketched. Her stitches had meaning again, rage, grief, defiance, woven in thread. "I don't want to return as a ghost," she told Elijah one night. "I want to return with power." He nodded, watching the firelight dance in her eyes. "Then you need to know who your enemy is and where they are now." Chaza stood. "I already do, and I'm coming for her." Months passed, and under the name Chaza Nwud, Charity returned to the Lagos fashion scene like a silent wave gaining strength. Her designs appeared subtly at first, worn by influencers who didn't know the woman behind the label. Chaza worked with Elijah's help to form a new brand under a shell company, House of Kari. Within weeks, whispers began circulating in the fashion world. Who was the mysterious designer making waves with collections that felt raw, powerful, and personal? Meanwhile, Tanya, now a full-blown fashion celebrity, began noticing her own brand's declining influence. "Everyone's talking about this new label," she told her assistant impatiently. "Find out who's behind it." The assistant returned later with a shrug. "Anonymous backer, no public face." but buyers are going mad for it. Tanya's jaw tightened. She'd seen one of the pieces up close. It reminded her of someone she thought she'd buried. Backstage at a small but prestigious fashion show, Chaza watched from behind the curtain as her pieces walked the runway, elegant, sharp, and unapologetically bold. She remained in the shadows, refusing interviews or photos. "Let them feel me before they see me," she told Elijah after the show. The applause was thunderous. One journalist tweeted, "The mysterious Chaza Nwood is the raw heart the Nigerian fashion industry didn't know it needed." At home, Chaza sat alone, sipping tea, her sketchpad on her lap. She was getting stronger, not just in talent, but in resolve. She wasn't returning to beg for justice. She was building a kingdom that would make her betrayal unforgettable. "I won't just ruin her name," she whispered to the empty room. "I'll destroy the pedestal she built on my bones." Tanya received a gold-trimmed invitation to the upcoming Legacy of Fashion Gala, where top designers and investors would gather to celebrate the industry's finest. "You're being honored," her assistant beamed. "Fashion icon of the year." Tanya smirked, but her eyes were restless. "Make sure I know everyone attending." That night, in her suite, she flipped through the guest list and froze at the last name. Nwood House of Kari. Her stomach knotted. "Why does that name feel familiar?" she muttered. She shook it off. Probably another copycat. But she made a note to attend the gala early. Across the city, Chaza circled the same event on her calendar. "She'll see me, Elijah," she said, her voice calm. "Not immediately, but she will feel my presence in that room." The gala buzzed with camera flashes, laughter, and glittering gowns. Chaza arrived unnoticed, dressed in midnight blue with a veiled hat obscuring part of her face. She didn't need recognition, only attention. When her collection was showcased, there was a pause in the room. Gasps followed. The precision, the story, the pain beneath the silk. People rose to their feet. At a distance, Tanya clapped slowly, her smile forced. Her eyes locked briefly with Chaza's across the hall. Something about the woman unsettled her deeply. "Do I know you?" she asked politely later that evening when Chaza passed by. "Not yet," Chaza answered with a cold smile. "But you will." Then she vanished into the crowd. Tanya stood rooted, unnerved for the first time in years, and she didn't even know why. Oliver strolled into the rooftop lounge with his colleague, glass of wine in hand. The gala had ended, but the after-party buzzed with music and business talk. He wasn't much for social events anymore, but something about the designer tonight had piqued his interest. "That woman in blue," he told his friend. "Her work, it felt familiar, like I've seen it before." His eyes scanned the room again and froze when they landed on Chaza, now sitting alone on a velvet couch by the window. It tilted his head. Her profile, the curve of her jaw, the way her hand moved as she lifted her glass, it all ignited a quiet storm of memory. He walked over slowly. "Excuse me," he said. "You looked familiar from across the room. Have we met before?" Chaza looked up, and for a brief second, her breath caught, but she smiled politely. "I doubt it. I don't attend many events." Oliver frowned, still studying her. "Are you sure? You remind me of someone I once knew. Years ago." His voice softened, almost as if confessing a loss. "Her name was Charity." Chaza held his gaze. "She must have meant something to you." He nodded. "She did. She disappeared." She paused, then replied quietly, "Some people don't disappear. They're just waiting to return when no one expects them." Oliver's expression shifted slightly. Something clicked, but the words were slippery in his mind. Before he could ask more, she rose gracefully. "It was nice talking with you, Mr. Duru." And with that, she walked away, leaving him with a ghost of a memory and a name on his tongue that felt like unfinished poetry. Chaza's atelier in Victoria Island had become a sacred space, quiet, intentional, and brimming with the scent of fresh fabrics and vengeance. Each piece she designed was a calculated strike. Her new collection, Venom in Silk, mirrored betrayal in color and shape, each thread sewn with the memory of her fall. With every stitch, she imagined Tanya's carefully curated empire unraveling. She began to leak select pieces to high-end buyers she knew once belonged to Tanya's clientele, offering custom exclusives they couldn't refuse. As word spread, Tanya's pre-orders began to drop. "It's that damned House of Kari," she hissed to her team. "We need to sabotage their line before the spring exhibition." but no one could get close. Chaza operated in shadows, tight security, anonymous deliveries, and rotating staff. Her identity remained a mystery. Still, her work crept like vines across the industry, tangling around Tanya's roots. Backstage at an elite buyer preview, Chaza stood silently as the models rehearsed. A whisper among assistants reached her ears. Someone tried to bribe our printer to delay shipment. She didn't flinch. Tanya, she said flatly, turning to Elijah, who stood nearby. She's flailing, but let her struggle. We're not done. That evening, she sent a single sketch, one of her original stolen designs from 5 years ago, to a fashion blogger anonymously. Within hours, the internet buzzed with questions about design theft and uncredited artistry. Tanya saw it too. She stared at the screen, her hand trembling. The pattern was too familiar. It's a coincidence, she told herself aloud. But something gnawed at her gut. Elizabeth, who happened to see the article over breakfast, studied the design more closely. Why does this look like one of Charity's old pieces? She asked aloud. Tanya froze mid-sip. Drop it, Liz, she snapped. It's nothing. But her sister's eyes lingered longer than usual. Something inside her stirred, an old memory she hadn't dared to question. Elizabeth wasn't the type to pry, but something about the growing buzz around House of Kari and its designer unsettled her. That evening, she paid an unannounced visit to the boutique that housed Chaza's exclusive line. She walked in slowly, letting her fingers brush the edge of the fabrics, her eyes narrowing with every detail. Then she saw it. Tucked in a display case was a bracelet. Simple, handmade, barely worth anything, except she recognized it. That's mine, she whispered. Years ago, she'd gifted that bracelet to Charity on her birthday. Her heart thudded. Excuse me, she called to the store manager. I'd like to speak with the designer. The woman smiled politely. She's rarely on site, but if you leave a note... Elizabeth shook her head. No need. She pulled out her phone and snapped a picture of the bracelet. Later that night, she visited her father's old storage unit where they had boxed up Charity's belongings after her disappearance. She rummaged until she found a photo album. Flipping through, her hands stopped at a picture, Charity wearing that exact bracelet, arms wrapped around Tanya during their university days. Elizabeth's eyes welled up. Something wasn't right. Why would a stranger have this, she murmured. She sent a message to Tanya with the photo attached. Does this mean anything to you? Minutes passed before Tanya replied. It's just an old bracelet. People sell these all the time. Elizabeth didn't believe her. Not anymore. She paced the room, phone pressed to her chest. You knew something happened to her, she whispered. But you never told me what. As night settled, her resolve hardened. If Tanya wouldn't talk, she would find answers herself. Oliver's office was unusually quiet as he sat by the window, eyes fixed on the skyline. In front of him lay a faded photograph, one of the last taken of Charity at a public event. Why now? He muttered, tapping the frame. His mind kept returning to the woman at the gala, the one who sounded nothing like Charity but felt too familiar to ignore. He flipped open his journal, where he had scribbled half-formed thoughts from that evening. Some people don't disappear. They wait. He kept hearing her voice. That night, he couldn't sleep. He dug through his archive of Charity sketches and held them beside an article on Chaza Nwude's recent launch. The lines weren't identical, but the soul behind them was. His heart clenched. Could she be alive? And if she was, why hadn't she come back? The next day, Oliver visited the House of Kari's flagship showroom under the pretense of commissioning a custom suit. Chaza was not there, but he studied everything, designs, color stories, signatures. One blouse in particular had tiny embroidery in the hem. A woman should rise, not beg. His breath caught. She used to say that, he whispered. Only her. He took a deep breath and turned to the attendant. Tell the designer someone named Oliver Duru wants a meeting. Just tell her I still carry her last smile. When he walked out, his chest felt heavier. Across the city, Chaza received the message later that evening. Her hands went cold. Elijah looked at her silently. What will you do? He asked. Chaza closed her eyes. Nothing, not yet. But deep inside, her walls trembled. Because for the first time since her return, her heart remembered how to ache. The storm came in the early hours, thunderous, unrelenting. Chaza stood before the mirror in her dimly lit bedroom. one hand holding a silver hand mirror, the other tracing the faint scar above her left brow. Her reflection felt unfamiliar yet undeniable. Charity, she whispered, allowing the name to pass through her lips for the first time in years. Her voice broke at the sound. She placed the hand mirror down and unzipped a box Elijah had left for her weeks ago. Inside were old clippings, photos, her original ID card, even a birthday card signed by Elizabeth. Every piece was a splinter of who she used to be. She sank to the floor, clutching one of the sketches, one she remembered drawing during a rainstorm just like this one. She was so hopeful, she murmured, tears streaking silently down her cheeks. So trusting. Later, Elijah found her curled on the floor, surrounded by the memories. He knelt beside her without speaking. "It's all coming back," she said, not looking up. "And the more I remember, the more it hurts." Elijah took her hand gently. "You don't have to go through this alone." She looked at him, eyes bloodshot. "But I did, that night, and no one came." Silence settled between them until she spoke again. "Do you think I'm cruel for wanting her to suffer?" Elijah didn't flinch. "No. But I think revenge is like a mirror. It reflects everything you point it at, including yourself." Chaza exhaled shakily. "Then maybe it's time I stop hiding behind someone I created. Maybe it's time she sees what she destroyed." Elijah helped her up. "Whatever path you choose now, I'll walk it with you." She gave a faint nod, but her eyes had changed. She wasn't just Chaza anymore. She was both storm and silence, and she was ready to let them meet. The exhibition center in Lagos buzzed with anticipation. It was the opening night of the National Fashion Alliance Showcase, an event that gathered the biggest names in West African design. Tanya stood at the center of the gallery, basking in the attention, while her PR team hovered nearby. But halfway through the event, whispers began to ripple across the crowd. Screens on the outer hall flickered to life, displaying an anonymous video submission titled "Origins of a Stolen Thread." Tanya's smile froze as side-by-side sketches appeared on screen, Charity's original hand-drawn pieces, and the designs Tanya had passed off as her own. Gasps filled the air. "Where did this come from?" her manager asked, panicked. Tanya backed away slowly, her throat tightening. Her competitors and investors turned to her with cold, curious eyes. "That's a serious allegation," someone muttered behind her. At that moment, Chaza arrived, not as a ghost, but as the guest of honor, introduced anonymously just before her collection walked. The crowd turned. Though veiled in elegance, her presence was undeniable. She watched Tanya from across the room as her own pieces were unveiled, bold, painful, powerful. Each fabric screamed of betrayal wrapped in beauty. Elijah walked beside her, silent and watchful. "You didn't hold back," he murmured. Chaza replied, "She taught me how to bleed beautifully. I just learned to sew it into fabric." Tanya tried to approach her during intermission, but Chaza turned away, leaving her standing alone in the midst of unraveling reputation. Before the night ended, 2 major sponsors dropped Tanya's label. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, press inquiries, cancellations, investor withdrawals. But the worst part wasn't the fallout. It was the look in Elizabeth's eyes when they finally met by the exit, disappointment, disbelief, and something dangerously close to pity. The following morning, Tanya locked herself in her study, pacing. "This isn't the end," she whispered. "People forget." But Elizabeth stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "Did you really think you'd get away with all of it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I went through Charity's things, Tanya. I saw what you buried." Tanya turned sharply. "Watch your tone." But Elizabeth stepped forward, tossing a flash drive on the desk. "I copied your old files, the originals. The design drafts she made, the ones you erased and passed off as your own." Tanya's expression shifted from anger to fear. "Why would you do that?" Elizabeth's voice cracked. "Because I loved her too. Because she trusted us, and you betrayed her." That evening, Elizabeth met with Elijah in a quiet cafe under the guise of legal consultation. She slid the drive across the table. "She deserves the truth," she said softly. Elijah gave her a steady look. "This changes everything. Are you ready for the fallout?" Elizabeth nodded slowly. She already lost everything. The least I can do is give her back her voice. Across town, Chaza received the call and opened the email. As she watched the files download, high-resolution scans of the stolen designs, time-stamped drafts, handwritten notes in her old script, her hands went cold. "She's finally turning on her," she whispered. Elijah replied, "And you finally have what you need to bury her." Chaza stared at the screen, every detail another stitch in her truth. "No," she said after a pause, "this isn't for burial. It's for resurrection." The press conference was held at a private event hall, away from flashing lights and loud fashion runways. Only select media outlets and a few elite industry insiders were invited. They came expecting a product launch, but what they witnessed shattered the illusions they'd built around Tanya Okari. Chaza stepped onto the stage dressed in sleek black, her voice calm as she addressed the crowd. "For years you've praised a legacy built on lies," she began. Murmurs rippled through the room. Then the projector screen lit up. A recording played, a distorted yet recognizable voice. Tanya's laughing drunkenly on a balcony 5 years ago. "If she ever finds out, I'll just say I did it for love. Besides, who's going to believe her over me?" The audio was clear. Conversations paused. The room shifted. Elijah watched from the side, hands folded, as Chaza revealed the second exhibit, sketches and fabric plans from her original portfolio, each with digital timestamps and emails linked to Tanya's account. The evidence was undeniable. "She didn't just take my work," Chaza said slowly. "She tried to erase me from existence." Gasps echoed. Journalists scrambled to take notes. One whispered, "Is she Charity?" Another nodded. Tanya wasn't present, but her absence screamed louder than her presence ever could. In a room where applause had once followed her name, there was now only silence and a deep collective shame. After the presentation, someone approached Chaza quietly. "We believed the wrong person," the woman said. "I'm sorry." Chaza simply replied, "Belief is cheap. Justice isn't." The press release hit the internet hours later. Chaza Nwud, the woman who refused to stay silent. Tanya's empire began to crumble in real time. Oliver stood frozen in front of the television in his apartment, the headline flashing across the screen. His wine glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor, but he didn't move. The face on the screen, stronger, colder, changed, was hers. "Charity," he breathed, "not Chaza. Not a ghost. It had always been her." His mind reeled with every moment they had spent together, the way her eyes flickered when he called her name that night at the gala. "How didn't I see it?" he whispered. He reached for his phone, his hands unsteady, and dialed the number he'd been given from the boutique weeks ago. When the line connected, a quiet voice answered, "Yes." He didn't waste time. "I know it's you. I don't need proof. I need to see you." They met the next evening in a quiet restaurant on the outskirts of town. Chasaward Nodizgise. She came as herself, no longer hiding. Oliver stood as she approached, stunned into stillness. "You're real," he said softly. "I thought I was going mad." She sat opposite him, folding her hands. "You weren't. You just buried the truth like everyone else." His eyes filled. "I looked for you. After you disappeared, I thought you'd left me." She didn't flinch. "You believed her. That was enough to bury me." Oliver shook his head. "I was blind, and I regret it every day." A long silence settled between them. Then he reached across the table. "Let me help you now. Whatever you need." She gently withdrew her hand. "This is a road I walk alone, but maybe you being here means something." As he watched her leave again, Oliver knew he might never have her back, but he would never forget the weight of her survival. Inside the Okari mansion, the air was thick with tension. Tanya sat across from her mother, Veronica, who was furiously flipping through papers spread across the dining table. "Do you realize what this means?" Veronica hissed. "You've dragged our entire family name through mud." Tanya folded her arms. "You helped me bury her. Don't pretend you were innocent." Veronica's face paled. "I never said push her off a cliff, Tanya. I thought we were sabotaging a career, not committing a crime." Tanya stood abruptly. "You knew what I was capable of, and you still covered for me." Veronica walked to the cabinet, pulled out a small envelope, and tossed it at her daughter. "Then maybe it's time you carry the consequences." The envelope contained photos, proof of the hush money sent to a resort staff member who'd witnessed that night. Tanya's hands shook. "Why are you showing me this now?" she asked. Her mother's voice cracked. Because someone is blackmailing me with it. They want you to confess, or I go down too. Tanya's breath hitched. She's behind this. She's toying with us. Veronica turned, her eyes filled with something rare fear. Then maybe it's time you stop playing princess and face the woman you tried to destroy. That night, Tanya locked herself in her room, staring at a mirror that no longer flattered her. The cracks were everywhere, in her empire, her relationships, and now her bloodline. For the first time, she understood that this wasn't just about a rival returning. It was about a legacy slowly bleeding out from the inside. It happened on a rainy Friday, just after Elizabeth stepped out of her university lecture hall. She barely had time to open her umbrella before two men in dark hoodies flanked her from either side. "Quiet, get in the car," one of them growled. Her scream was muffled before it could form. Within seconds, she was thrown into the back seat of a black SUV, the doors locked behind her. Panic surged through her veins as she fought against the restraints. "You're making a mistake," she cried. One of the men turned with a smirk. "No, sweetheart. The mistake was crossing your sister." Hours passed before Elijah received a blocked call. "We have the girl," a distorted voice said. "Back off, or next time we won't be so gentle." Elijah's blood ran cold. He knew instantly who was behind it. "Tanya's out of options," he said to Chaza. "She's cornered, and now she's playing wild." Chaza didn't hesitate. She reached for her phone and dialed a private number, a man from her past who owed her more than a favor. "I need eyes on a black SUV. You'll have the plate in 10 minutes, she said coolly. While Elijah worked with law enforcement, Chaza slipped out the back door into the night, dressed in black and anger. Her mind pulsed with visions of Elizabeth's face, innocent, kind, undeserving of this darkness. By dawn, the SUV had been tracked to a remote warehouse outside town. Inside, Elizabeth sat bruised but defiant, whispering prayers under her breath. "If she's alive," Chaza told Elijah, "then Tanya's about to find out what fear really feels like." Just before the rescue team stormed the building, Chaza stood silently at the entrance, staring in. When their eyes met, hers and Elizabeth's, a single tear fell down Elizabeth's cheek. "You came," she whispered. "Always," Chaza replied, her voice trembling for the first time. "I couldn't lose you too." Tanya stood on the edge of the same cliff where everything had begun 5 years earlier. The early morning air was cold and silent, heavy with anticipation. She hadn't been summoned. She came of her own volition after receiving a single text from an unknown number. "Meet me where it all ended." Chaza stood waiting, her arms folded, her expression unreadable. "Still love the theatrics, don't you?" Tanya scoffed as she approached. "Not theatrics," Chaza replied. "Justice." The wind whipped through their hair as the sea below crashed with relentless fury. Tanya crossed her arms. "So what now? You've dragged my name through the dirt, turned Elizabeth against me, ruined everything I built. Is that not enough?" Chaza tilted her head. "I didn't ruin you, Tanya. You did that all by yourself. I just stopped protecting you." Tanya's composure cracked. "You don't get to stand there like you're better. You tried to poison me. I knew you resented me." Chaza's eyes burned. "I made a mistake. A petty, reckless mistake. But you pushed me off a cliff. You tried to erase me." Tanya's hands trembled at her sides. Panicked. Her voice broke. "I was jealous, yes, but I didn't know you'd survive." Chaza took a step closer. "You didn't care if I did." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the ocean roaring beneath them. Then Chaza said softly, "I brought no press. No camera, no vengeance here, just truth." Tanya's voice quivered. "Are you going to push me now?" Chaza shook her head slowly. "No, because that would make me exactly what you hoped I'd become." She turned and began to walk away. "You'll live with it, Tanya, and that's far worse than death." The next morning, news broke like a dam that had long been under pressure. A viral video, shot secretly from a nearby bluff, had captured Chaza and Tanya's cliffside confrontation. Though no incriminating confession was fully audible, Tanya's panicked words and trembling form were unmistakable. The caption read, "The truth doesn't need a microphone to be heard." Within hours, every major fashion outlet had picked up the story. Investors publicly severed ties. Her staff resigned en masse. And for the first time in a decade, Tanya Okari's name was no longer on the front page of a fashion column, but in a police report. By evening, she was escorted from her home in handcuffs, her mother watching through tear-filled eyes. "I warned you," Veronica whispered, but her voice carried no judgment, only regret. Oliver stood outside the courthouse, watching it all unfold. The flashing cameras, the shouted questions, the collapse of the empire he once silently admired. When Chaza arrived moments later, dressed in white and serenity, the crowd parted for her without a word. Reporters surged forward, but she raised a hand. "There will be no statement," she said firmly. "Some things don't need headlines." Elijah stood behind her, protective but proud. As Tanya was led into the van, she looked at Chaza, no longer with hatred, but with something closer to surrender. Their eyes met one last time. Chaza didn't smile. She simply nodded. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the quiet walk of the survivor past the ruins of the destroyer. And that day, Lagos watched in stunned silence as the tables truly turned. The Fashion Guild Council gathered for its annual summit in Abuja, an event once dominated by the likes of Tanya Okari. But this year, the room carried a different energy, quieter, more reverent. At the head of the room stood Chaza Nwood, newly elected as chairwoman, her name now whispered with respect, not mystery. As she stepped up to the podium, applause erupted. "I never thought I'd stand here," she began, her voice steady. "Not because I lacked the talent, but because I once believed people like me weren't allowed to rise again." Her words hung in the air like fine embroidery, subtle, textured, unforgettable. She acknowledged no enemies, mentioned no names. She spoke of resilience, accountability, and what it meant to create without fear. And though she smiled for the cameras afterward, her eyes carried the weary grace of someone who had bled for every inch of her ascent. Later that evening, alone in the office now bearing her name, she stared out at the skyline. Elijah entered quietly, holding a small box. "They found this among the storage files at the guild office," he said, placing it gently on her desk. Inside was a dusty folder labeled CN Originals, 2018. Her hands hovered over it, then opened it slowly. The designs inside were hers, lost, stolen, and now returned. "Full circle," she murmured. Elijah watched her, then asked softly, "So what now?" Chaza leaned back in her chair. "Now. I rest. I lead. But I don't chase ghosts anymore." A knock interrupted the moment. Oliver stood in the doorway, hesitant. "I heard the chairwoman might need flowers," he said with a half-smile, holding a small bouquet of lilies. Chaza didn't rise, but her lips curved. "Only if she doesn't have to explain the thorns." Days later, the city was stunned again, not by scandal, but by silence. Chaza was found unconscious in her apartment, collapsed beside her sewing table, her body weakened from months of relentless work, emotional strain, and internal bleeding she hadn't noticed. She hadn't slept in days, hadn't eaten in peace. The doctors called it a sudden medical breakdown triggered by accumulated exhaustion and untreated trauma. Elijah paced the hospital halls, refusing to leave her side. Elizabeth sobbed quietly in the waiting room, gripping her sister's ring, the one Chaza had removed that morning as if she knew the storm was near. "She said she wanted a day to herself," Elizabeth whispered. "I should have known that meant goodbye, but the doctors said it wasn't goodbye. Not yet." She was in a coma, stable, breathing, but deeply withdrawn, as if her soul had paused to decide if it wanted to stay. In the stillness of her hospital room, Chaza lay surrounded by soft flowers and the hum of machines. The world outside debated whether she would return again. News outlets referred to her as the phoenix in sleep. But inside that quiet space, her last handwritten letter, addressed to Elijah and Elizabeth, rested beside her bed. "I fought, I endured, I reclaimed," it read. "But healing is not the same as living. If I wake, let me live without fear. If I don't, tell the world I left with my name returned." Elizabeth read it aloud with trembling hands, while Elijah turned his face away, unable to watch her cry. "She'll come back," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "She's not done yet." And as the sun rose through the window the next morning, a single flicker of movement passed across Chaza's fingers, subtle, quiet, but real. Enough to prove that even in silence, her story wasn't over. Here's the Bible verse. Explanation. This verse captures Charity's journey perfectly. Once betrayed, abandoned, and nearly destroyed, she rises again, not as a victim, but as the foundation of something stronger. She becomes a symbol of justice, truth, and unshakable purpose, despite being cast aside by those she trusted most. Moral of the story: true strength isn't in revenge, but in reclaiming what was stolen without losing who you are. Expanded thought. This story teaches us that while pain and betrayal can break the surface of a person's life, it is their choice to either become a reflection of their pain or a force for something greater. Charity's journey reminds us that healing doesn't mean forgetting, but rising again with wisdom, dignity, and the power to confront evil without becoming it. Justice can be quiet, and survival itself can be the loudest revenge. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.